The mic. You already caused enough trouble. You gonna come up here? You gonna make an appearance as to why the show's late? Huh? Huh? Come on. There you go. This episode of the Unwashed Asses is brought to you in part by this fucking asshole who decided to puke right before showtime, causing me to clean it up, as well as patreon.com/0and09. You get your puke face out of my face. If you like this show, if you like Wacky Wednesdays, I guess we could loop that in with this because I'm running that. If you also see, you got your puke breath in my face, and now it's throwing me off. It's throwing me off, man. What other shows? Zero Lives on Monday. So if you dig this show, that show, and the entire lack of professionalism and fat faces, head on over to patreon.com/0and09. Pick it, pick pot. I can't talk. How are we gonna do this? Fuck it. Don't donate anything. It's not worth it. Let's get on with the show. Oh boy, that went way longer than it should have. I never ever get to the lyrics, but Dexter's Dexter's decided that he's going to do everything he can to throw this show off today. So hey Mezzy, how goes it? Yeah. So Dexter decides, you know what? You fed me this morning. Everything's gonna be awesome, and I'm gonna go ahead and just eat it all up, and then puke everywhere in the living room. Fuck you and your show prep and trying to get things ready, and I'm just gonna go ahead and ruin all that. But you're gonna forgive me because I have this fat fluffy little face. So yeah, show's late. Sorry, can't help it. It's either take the time and clean up the cat puke, or sit here and just smell it the entire time, and that's awful. Nobody wants to smell cat puke. Less of all me. I mean, you guys can't smell it, so you just kind of have to wonder what the hell's going on back here. Which it's hot. I'm in a little hot box right now because the weather's picked up. We had some nasty storms roll through last night. The tornado warning sirens were going off. If you're watching over Wednesday or whatever you want to call it, then we got both cats now. Then you know the apartment was almost blown away by tremendous gale force winds, lightning, thunder, sideways rain, and at the end of it we spotted a funnel cloud. So that was fun. Um, but no, it appears everything's working. I didn't get called into work this morning, and if they have tried calling me, well, phone's kind of off. So good luck. uh, you'll notice everything's well lit now. I did some tinkering. By tinkering, I mean I took off some lampshades and put some lamps on either side of the desk, and you know what? It looks so much better. It does. I can see my beautiful bearded face, and it's not dark or have that blue tint. And if you jumped off my lap, you're not coming back up here. That's not the game we're playing. We will have plenty of time to finish Iron Man 3 later in the day with you on my lap. Possibly eating a burrito. So, happy surprise this morning. Went ahead and if you remember a couple weeks ago, I worked a fuckload of overtime and made me super tired. I was kind of down, not down like depressed, just tired, just wore out. So a couple weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, was it? As you remember, I fell asleep. Fell asleep. I can't talk. Fuck. What am I doing with my life? I fell asleep on the Friday night Smite stream, and you know what? That chicken has come home to roost because the bank account looking pretty nice this morning, looking really fucking good. So I found, well, I shouldn't say I found. Polygon had put up a deal on their Twitter, on the Twitter, that was, here's the latest gaming hardware deals, where to find them, all that. And they had PS4 with the Uncharted bundle was going for $248, and that's normally like $50 off. So that's great. In addition to that, though, the site that was listing it, I think it was like Jets or something along those lines, had an additional promo where if it was one of your first 3 orders through them, you got an additional 15% off. And so doing some quick math, I'm like, oh shit, I could get a PlayStation for a little over $200. That's damn near, a third of the price off. And I talked to myself like, you really have been really wanting a PlayStation for quite some time now, and what better time? I mean, you've been waiting years and years and years, and odds are the price isn't going to drop down any further, at least not for the foreseeable future. We have the new PlayStation Pro coming out, and and the price will probably drop then, but I don't know. There's a couple games I want to play now, like Bloodborne. I have Bloodborne sitting on my shelf, but no PlayStation to play it in because I love the game that much. That the short time I did get to play it, swoon, won me over. So beyond that, the Nier Automata looked really good, not just for the sexy robot ladies who chop things up with their swords, mostly because it's a Platinum game. Platinum has yet to do me wrong as a developer. I know they turned out some shit titles on the Wii U in terms of like Star Fox, but Vanquish and Bayonetta were just astounding through and through. Just phenomenal games. I loved them to pieces. I've said this many times over, but Bayonetta was what kind of got me out of my gaming slump, where I was getting sick of nothing but first-person shooters time and time again, and that one was so irreverent and different and unique and just very well crafted that I fell in love with video games again. So, where was I going with this? I haven't eaten yet, guys. I woke up and I'm like, you know what? I was in a shit mood last night, and I'm tired still because I'm a man who's in his 30s and works a lot, and so I'm tired. I'm always so goddamn tired. But no, I didn't eat breakfast. I woke up and like, you know what? Fuck it. I've got a show to do. Let's do this show. So no breakfast. I've had a sip of water. That's it. So I'm running on fumes right now. But by God, we're gonna do a show. So, aside from that, there are a few unique titles that I wanted to get for the PlayStation, and of course, that's the idea. That's why they do platform exclusives, where you want to have games that draw people to your platform itself. Like, I've had the Xbox 360 and now the Xbox One, and I've stuck with that because there weren't any exclusives that really were forcing me over to the PlayStation side. I was interested in Demon Souls, but then we had the Dark Souls series, and then Mag looked good, but that died out pretty quickly. So there wasn't anything, aside from Metal Gear, which I kind of got burned out on, that was saying, oh, come back to the Sony side. I was getting everything I really wanted with Xbox, and the other big thing was that all of my friends had an Xbox. So there was virtually no draw to it. And then that some bitch Bloodborne comes rolling out, platform exclusive, just like its predecessor Demon's Souls was. Like, shit. That's a sexy fucking game. Look at the legs on it. Look at the way it walks and struts and handles itself. And I had to wait a little bit, and then a former lady friend of mine went ahead and bought the PlayStation, and Bloodborne just came over one night, like, "Hey, how's it going?" Like, "Yes, this is awesome." And I fell in love. I got, I don't know, maybe a third or almost halfway through the game, and well, at least I cleared the first third of it, and just it was everything I hoped it could be. And I had not really played any of the Soul series up until that point, and so when I got into it, it was an entirely new and different experience, but it ticked all the boxes that I was looking for. So when things went south and she took the PlayStation back, and then it eventually got stolen, I was like, oh, that makes me sad. One, it's a terrible thing that relationship ended, but two, I can't play Bloodborne anymore. So, priorities, right? So, went ahead and found Bloodborne sitting for $20 at a GameStop. Like, you know what, whatever, brand new. I'll at least have it. You can see in the back point there. I've got the board game, and I'm really into the series. So of course I at one point will get a PlayStation so I can play it again. And so I'm looking and I see the deal, and I'm still like, as of this moment, I'm still hemming and hawing about it because the paycheck was nice enough that yes, I would still have extra money in the bank. I could sit comfortably, but the adult part of me, the responsible part, says, well, no, you have that extra money. Keep saving that extra money, and tucking it away in case of a rainy day, because inevitably it always comes down to something popping up, and all of a sudden you don't have the money for it, or you dig yourself in a hole, which sucks. So while this is a screaming deal on a PlayStation, I don't need it. I really, really want it, but I don't need it. Just like I don't need this cat getting in my face, throwing off the vibe of the show. So I'm probably still going to wait on it. Still hold off as much as I want it. I don't have the time for playing more games, like adding more into the repertoire. And B, that's all it would be used for. Like, I have the Xbox that does everything else for me. I don't need another set-top box for like Netflix or playing Blu-rays or anything like that. It would be nice to have, but I can wait. And the games themselves aren't going anywhere. And what I can do to kind of offset that is, instead of getting the PlayStation, a few years later and then trying to find the games at a higher price, I can wait until they go on sale now, buy the games, they're sitting on my shelf, then go ahead and find a PS4 on the cheap, and the games I want, they're not multiplayer. Get away from my water. They're not multiplayer focused, so I'm not losing anything there. They're very much story-driven individual arcs. So creaky chair aside and cat on the table, I think that's what we're gonna do, because there's other things that I could be spending that money on if I'm not saving it, like sorry, I had to wet the whistle. A new microphone. The Blue Yeti is only $100. I still need another mini HDMI or micro HDMI adapter for the setup here, so I stop casting it. And yeah, there's just all these other things I could spend the money on if I'm not going to save it. So I think instead what'll happen is this weekend I'll take the boy. We'll go see some Guardians 2. We'll have a nice lunch and enjoy a day out and the fruits of my labor, because honestly, that's why we all work, aside from paying the bills and keeping a roof over our heads, is to enjoy things and activities with the ones we love. And so we'll do just that. We'll go get some burgers. We'll watch Peter Quill and the Baby Groot, and just have a good old time with it. And then maybe Saturday. Saturday, get some sushi. Oh, fuck, sushi be good. Sushi be good. So yeah. It's hot. I'm tired, and we got 2 more segments to get through. Click it off. Okay, so to the astute viewer, or I guess listener in this case, you'll notice that, or I don't know if you'll notice because, oh geez, kill the audio. That one is Murgo or Lullaby for Murgo from the Bloodborne soundtrack because I'm that much of a raging fucking nerd for that game, and I think it works as a good segue. I think it does. So, if we're gonna segue in and stick with the spooky and the scary, because apparently that's what makes me up is the spooky, scary elements of life and just general dickish behavior. Um, I had been looking for books to read, and I found a couple sitting in my own collection that I hadn't finished yet. So work's still a little slow, and that means I can sit in my truck and read until a job rolls through. And I'm trying to get back in the habit of reading a little bit before bed, and instead of browsing Imgur and Reddit and effectively just wasting my time. Make myself a little smarter. I'm a little more well read, even if I am reading terrible science fiction. So, started reading. I had volume 19 of the Vampire Hunter D series, and I had been reading this one for, God, actually over a decade now. I've been reading this book series for a really fucking long time. And at first, it's written by Hideaki Kikuchi. I don't pronounce Japanese well. Anywho, it's translated from the original Japanese into English, and the guy pioneered a unique little subgenre of horror where we have it's a post-apocalyptic scenario mixed in with a western and horror elements, and it's a fascinating world that he's built and the stories he wants to tell with it. But what drew me to it, aside from that aesthetic, was the writing style. He writes with a flourish. It's very embellished, and his prose just, it goes and goes and goes. He likes to embellish on a lot of things. And it's great if you're looking to build up your adjective game and your descriptors and all that, but I don't know if I've outgrown it, because as I was reading this one, I'm noticing the pattern that I didn't really want to admit to with the previous entries into it, where it follows a very similar plot. It works well for how he does it. There's not an overarching story between all of the books. They're all self-contained. Effectively, you've got this little town out in the frontier. It's like a little western town. Almost invariably, there is a vampire lord who's been dead or rumored dead for hundreds, if not thousands of years. But he's got this castle just on the outskirts that people don't go near. And then some spooky stuff starts happening, and the mayor of the town has to hire a hunter to go either save a girl or kill the vampire lord, or something to that effect. So then you have your pretty girl character who acts as a love interest, but it isn't really a love interest. And then we have um, the other hunters that show up, and of course the main character himself, D, who is a half vampire, half human, product of a love relationship with Dracula and some lady, and at the point that D enters the scene, the good writing, it takes a turn for the worse in that, one, we haven't really built up the other characters. We're getting the base about them. We're getting just enough to understand who they are and what their motivations are, but because these characters get changed out every book, it's just kind of like, who gives a shit? So they're not really fully fleshed out. They're almost palette swaps from the characters in the previous books. And once D shows up, it becomes a thing of the author just inserting the character's cock into his mouth and sucking him off for the rest of the book, because there's nothing that can stop D. He faces no real challenge. If he encounters something, you can bet within 2 pages he's figured out how to overcome it. And he's the typical. He's designed for a younger generation, like the angsty teenage boy, or I guess the teenage girl, because he fits the. He, well, that's one thing with the book itself. Like, D is apparently so fucking beautiful and attractive that men and women and monsters alike just stop when he shows up, and they are just drawn to his otherworldly beauty. It stops them in their tracks. And so, very handsome. He's very quiet, very mysterious, but when it gets down to brass tacks, he kicks all kinds of ass. And so, because he is this tight ass who's focused on this one mission, which isn't really ever explained, at least not in the 19 books that I've read. You think he's gunning for Dracula, but you're never really sure, because the backstory I've pieced together is that humanity was kind of laid waste to by the vampires as they came out of hiding, and they advanced technology, light years ahead, where we have actual space stations that are no longer in use, great technology and whatnot. And then apparently they became too bourgeois, and Dracula got sick of it, and so he just massacred the shit out of them. So we don't know if D is trying to find his father and put an end to him, because Dracula never really pops up like directly. There's hints and lingerings, like almost ghosts or an echo of him, that you encounter a few times, but nothing that's really substantial. Like, oh shit, here's Dracula. And so I should look up and see how many books there are in total in the series, because as I was reading the series, they were still being translated and brought to the U.S. Um, but but the problem with them is that, one, they're interchangeable stories, which I've mentioned, and two is just D himself, while a very stereotypically cool character, he's not compelling. And that's just it. The cool factor wears off when you, at least for me, it wore off as I got older. Like, I can understand why he wrote him this way, and it's very much almost not like a Mary. Well, yeah, it is. It's a Mary Sue, where everything comes naturally and easy to him, and it kind of makes for a boring read, because it's all like the fight scenes are very flowery. The interactions with other characters are kind of jagged, and you get the feeling that D is just this complete dickhead. He's a self-serving asshole, which, in the context of the story, it makes sense. But when you do 19 books of the same thing, you got to change up the formula a little bit. And that's the thing. When I think back to all these books that I've read, there's not one that really sticks out as far as, oh, this one's unique, or I really like the story on this one. For the most part, I can't remember the individual stories, because they all follow that same thread. Um, the only one that really sticks out to me is the one that they made a movie about. And I think that was like book 2 or 3. and they substantially changed the premise of the other band of hunters that are palling around with D. Um, Rape is a very big thing in that particular book that never made it to the film, and for good reason. I like the rewrites that they did. Um, but yeah, so I started reading that and then kind of put it back down. I'll finish it eventually, but because right now it's a thing like I'm 19 fucking books into this series, I gotta finish it. Like I can't just quit. So I'll keep buying them and I'll keep reading them. They did make a manga series where the artwork is just astounding. I don't remember who the artist is, but I bought a couple of them and like, fuck, this is really, really good. And for the most part, it's a very faithful one-for-one retelling of the books. And I don't know, maybe I should pick up a few more of those and see if I can, it jogs my memory or makes the stories more memorable. Memorable? I still can't talk. What should I eat for lunch? Tacos sound good. Tacos always sound good. Anywho, so I put that one down and I realized I still had the collected works of Lovecraft to get through. And this is kind of where my long drawn out intro is going to come around, in that Lovecraft he falls into very similar patterns. I almost wanted to do a Jeff Foxworthy bit where like, you're reading Lovecraft when he describes New England countrysides for 10 pages. You're reading Lovecraft when it starts with an author who's run away from a situation that's too horrific to describe in detail, yet he must. You might be reading Lovecraft if there is a build-up through the entire book with a plot twist that you see coming from 2/4 of the way in, 50%, because I'm terrible at math and don't like rounding down. You might be reading Lovecraft if the descriptors on the monsters aren't really there because they are too profound for the characters to adequately describe them to you. You might be reading Lovecraft if he is very self-referential in his works and to other writers of the time. And these are the problems I have with Lovecraft. He's jumping from Kikuchi in the Vampire Hunter D series into Lovecraft. Trying to remember which one I last read. Anywho, it doesn't matter because all the stories are the fucking same. It's the same problem where we jump from one author to the other, and the concept is still there, where he gets into tropes. He follows the same pattern over and over. In Mezzi, I have tried Salvatore. I think I borrowed the Cleric Quintet from you, and I couldn't get into it. For whatever reason, the writing style, it didn't jive with me. And that was one series I did want to read a lot because I know you guys were like huge into the Drizzt saga and all that, and it ties in with Neverwinter and all this other lore that I'm really into. Even like the Dragon Age series, I dig it, but for whatever reason, Salvatore didn't pull me in. Hey, Snick Gameski. So I went ahead and put down Kikuchi and went over to Lovecraft again. And I have 2 stories left in this collection. I've read the entire collected works up until this point. And what's nice is they're done in a chronological order. So when he becomes self-referential and goes back to the previous, this happened in this story, you have that frame of reference. But it always begins with the author having run away from some scenario, some terrible, awful tragedy in this quaint New England town, but then he recants the story and goes through it And some of these are based in like a letter or a memoir, or it's just the narrator telling the story for the sake of telling the story. But it always begins with the author like, oh, this terrible thing happened, and we're gonna go ahead and tell you the story now. And then you get into what kind of set up the story, which the author, the not the author, the narrator is very clever, and it works in a field that's unique, like anthropology, archaeology, or in the most recent case, folklore. And so he's picking up patterns of things happening in a quaint New England town, typically centered around Arkham. I think he puts it in Massachusetts, which is good because he's building a world. It all fits together. But the man, much like Washington Irving in The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, has just this raging fucking hard on about um, New England countrysides. He loves New England, and from what I've read about Lovecraft, he was mostly a shut-in who came from an affluent family, and was raised in New England. Didn't really go out much. And yes, Mezzi, I have thought and have written a book. Well, it was a short story. You can get it on Amazon. It's called The Punishing Beast. It's a delightful little romp between Santa and Krampus. Um, Gonna go ahead and publish the sequel later. I'm trying to do like, I'd like to do one book every Christmas and keep the series going. And then I probably have 24 other short stories that are in various stages of completion. I had an idea beginning last year that I'm going to go ahead and publish at least one short story a month, sell them for like 99 cents on the Kindle, and then go ahead and release a compilation for like $10 at the end of the year. But because how I manage my time with work and then side shit like this, I don't actually sit down and write like I should. But getting back to Lovecraft, then what happens is, as he's describing this New England countryside, he builds a scene very well. Like, I can, unlike Vampire Hunter D, I can remember individual books and stories and the settings because Lovecraft took the time to properly flesh them out. But he goes in the other direction where it is too drawn out. He puts too much detail into it. And the problem with the too much detail is that while he can write a scene very well, when it comes to actual interaction between these eldritch horrors and the characters, that's where he flakes out. And that's what drives me nuts. Because he will describe an abomination, but he will liken it to other things, like it's a crab with bat wings and antenna and feelers on a circular head, but he doesn't go more in depth. And it allows the reader to kind of paint their own picture and envision it how they want. But and this is the catch 22. Like, all of these stories were written 100 years ago. Lovecraft was definitely a pioneer in the world of horror and just writing in general. He didn't see much praise in his time, as most visionaries don't. But what happened is that because everything else is so built on Lovecraft's works, like you have the entire Old God saga in Warcraft, you have things like Event Horizon. Essentially, if you can come up with a horror trope, odds are you can trace it back to Lovecraft. He was very ahead of his time. But the problem is, I've had 100 years of experience in media with books, games, TV, and because of this, I can predict what's going to happen, and ultimately, by the time Lovecraft gets to the payoff, I've seen it coming, and I'm just waiting for it to be done. I'm waiting for him to like fucking get on with it, roll into it, finish this story off. And by the time it actually happens, it's disappointing. It falls flat. In the case of the last story, I wish I could remember the name of the actual story. It's all based on these aliens that are working in the New England hills around a small town, and everybody from the Native Americans up to the people now living there in the 20s are aware of them or were aware of them, and they're clearly mining something there. They come from the outer reaches of the cosmos, and they come here, and as long as humanity leaves them alone, they don't really do much. And so the entire story is, well, not entire, but it is primarily told in a letter exchange between the narrator and a gentleman who lives there. And they're unraveling this mystery and finding out more about these creatures. But what happens is the creatures become aware of the man who's living there and start encroaching on his territory. So he's buying more guard dogs. There's shootouts that happen on moonless nights, and eventually, as letters get lost in the mail and intercepted, the narrator is then invited out to the estate. And it's such a tonal change because the letters are essentially read to you verbatim that you realize something's up. Something's not right, and you get out there, and all of a sudden there's a stranger who's introduced to the narrator that he wasn't even aware of, who's taking him out to meet this acquaintance. He's saying he's very sick, he's bandaged up and all this. And of course that that the aliens have taken the host, and they're sitting in his place to get the narrator. And it all ends with a payoff as far as sitting in the chair of what I once thought was my host that caused me absolute horror was his face and hands. It was a mask and gloves, effectively. And it sucked because it was like, I don't know, 45 minutes long as far as the read was concerned, but you saw it coming from a mile away. And that's the shitty thing. Like, I really like Lovecraft. The stories are exquisite, but he has 100 years of catching up essentially to do. It's almost like when you go back and play an old video game, and it's you know how it's going to play out. You realize the limitations. I've been running into this with Fable 2 in terms of there's only so much that can happen because it's based on a previous generation's technology. And so I understand there's going to be limitations, and I enjoy the experience for what it is, but I don't design games. I write stories. I'm a storyteller. And so I see the construct of the book itself and where the author's going with it and how he's doing it. And so when you're dealing with old works like Jules Verne or Bram Stoker or H.G. Wells, it becomes predictable. But these are the building blocks that other not necessarily better, but more intricate, more detailed stories were built on. And so I can't judge it too harshly, and I realize the disappointment is something of it's a fault on my own. And honestly, I mean, if you dig horror in any sense of the word, Lovecraft is an absolute must-read. For a lot of years, I put it off, much like I do many other things, because I get tired of the hype train, effectively. I had this with Portal, where everybody's ranting and raving about it. And so when you get into like the horror genre and the community surrounding it, everybody is off sucking Lovecraft's dick. But they never tell you what a lazy writer he is, or that he loves describing New England countrysides. And while I can appreciate the good stories, you need to bear those things in mind. So it was a mistake for me to have put it off as long as I have. I'm glad I've read them, but I don't know that they hold up. They definitely don't hold up. That being said, I did just recently start The Shadow over Innsmouth, which is one of his highest regarded works, much like The Call for Cthulhu. The Call of Cthulhu is, bar none, the best short story of his that I have read, and that one wasn't. It was the best because it wasn't predictable. It took several very interesting and diverse turns, and that by the time we got to the end, it's like, fuck, I really want more of this, and that is the the nice thing about Lovecraft is everything is it's interwoven. It's built on one another, and so you get hints of it here and there. But I don't know. There's nothing quite like the reading it for the first time. Oh, oh, I'm schwitzing like a poodle in a parka. Oh, jeez. I need to be more careful with the volume slider there. So, holy shit, it's really hot, you guys. I don't want to turn the air on because you don't want to hear that. You don't want to hear the air conditioning running and the gentle hum, much like the hum in the spire. If you're following the brave adventures of the war chicken in Fable 2 on Zero Lives, Monday nights at 9 p.m. Central. Shameless whoring. Uh, so part of what I do at work is sit in my truck, as I've explained. There's not a whole lot to do on some days, and as I'm waiting to be routed to a job or if whatever downtime I have, I'm like, you know what? Reading it sometimes puts me to sleep because I've built up this Pavlovian response where for years and years and years I've read before going to bed, and so invariably it makes water burps. It makes me tired. And so there will be many a time where I'm reading. It's, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, sun shining, there's a nice breeze going, and I'm just passed the fuck out. So I said, you know what, we need to break up this routine. We need to do something different. And I have a Nintendo DS and several games for it, and several games from a previous lady friend that I've yet to play. So it's like, you know what? Let's give this guy a whirl. Let's go ahead and fire him up. And the great thing about the DS was that the battery never fucking died. In the sense that I haven't played it since maybe a year ago. Still full charge. Just turned it on, ready to go. Which is, well, no, that's a lie. I haven't played it in about a year, but somebody else was playing the Pokemans on it. Either way, it's been months and months and months and months. So unlike a phone that, will die if you don't charge it on a daily basis, that thing it won't fucking die at all. And I love it for that. So I was looking through the list of games like, oh, well, the only Pokemon game I have left is Diamond and Pearl, and I've beaten those. And I have all the Pokemans. Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, Ring of Fates, which was good, but it's multiplayer designed. And then I saw, well, I could play more Castlevania, Order of Ecclesia, but I've beaten that one twice because it was so fucking good. And then I see, oh, what's this? What's this hiding in the corner in the stack of games that I never play? Couple other not fucking Final Fantasy, Castlevania titles I have sitting there, and they were from the past, one of the past lady friends, and I've yet to play them. Like, well, let's rectify this shit. So I picked up Portrait of Ruin, and Castlevania is one of those series that I've stuck with for years and years and years now. Much like Final Fantasy and Resident Evil, it's been a mainstay. It's been a staple in my gaming identity, my resume, where, for close to 2 decades I've been playing these games. And I can remember it all started when I was in... It all started, I need to get one of those fade effects where the screen gets wavy and we go doodaloo, doodaloo, doodaloo. I was 16, just started driving. I was seeing this girl Most of my stories start with a girl. I've noticed, and she was super into Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and rightfully so. I had never played of it, never really heard of it. There were a couple of Castlevania titles on the Nintendo 64, which were shit from what I heard, but I never picked them up. I was aware of them and the series in general, but I never sat down and played it. And so she lent her copy of Symphony of the Night to me, and I took it home and just fell in love. It still is probably one of the best games ever made. Unlike Lovecraft, it totally holds up. It's a delightful little 32 bits side scrolly intricate horror themed game of awesomeness. And I remember when I beat it, I took it back to her and I'm like, oh, it was so awesome, that happened. She's like, you didn't beat it. Excuse me? It's like, yeah, no, if you didn't get to the upside down castle, you only made it through half the game. I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, well, if you go and get this special item, it allows you to get an alternate boss fight at the end. Essentially, it changes the fight, and then the second half of the game will open up, and you can then get a few more endings. And at this time, I wasn't familiar with the concept of a game having more than one ending. It was always a thing of, you play the game through start to finish, and then you get the ending, and that's it. But Symphony of the Night changed that shit. It like the Upside Down Castle, it flipped it on its head. To the point of, like, there were at least 3 or 4 different endings in that game, and it's all based on what you do, what your completion percentage is, what items you've collected, and things like that. So that was a huge, huge stepping stone as far as, like, wow, games can be something more. And so from there, I stuck with the Castlevania series. Now, the problem with the Castlevania series is that it is spread across multiple platforms, and most of the games aren't cross-platform. So there was, you had it on the Nintendo, you had it on Super Nintendo, PlayStation, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS, Nintendo 64, PlayStation 2, and then it ended on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. And some of the games got carried over, they got ports, like, because Symphony of the Night was so popular and so successful, it's been ported to every device imaginable. I own at least 3 or 4 copies of the game in different iterations. And so I'd like to see that with more of the games, but in order to play the bulk of Castlevania, you have to have multiple consoles and devices to play it on, which sucks because that stuff costs money, but the games themselves also have a continuing storyline. In the case of Symphony of the Night, instead of focusing on one of the classic Belmont hunters, the fabled family that is eternally destined to fight Dracula every time he comes back, it followed Dracula's son, Alucard, which, in a bit of clever character design, Alucard's just Dracula backwards. And Alucard actually made his first appearance back in, it was either Castlevania 2 or 3 on Nintendo, on the regular Nintendo. So he was a character you encountered in the castle. And so he's come back, and the nice thing about this was I want to say it was Castlevania 3. And what happens is, because it is a continuation of that story, Alucard's now an adult, and he's encountering these other characters that were in that game, like Richter and Maria, and these other people that were in the original game. And so, as Mirage is saying, there's an official Castlevania timeline online, but it's really long because this game's been going for damn near 30 years, and they've kept the story going through it, where it's gone through, like, I want to say its most recent iteration, it's come up to present times where you were playing as Dracula in modern day times, and Dracula's the good guy, and it goes all the way back to the what was it, the 1500s with Leon Belmont in the first PlayStation title, Lament of Innocence, I think it was, which I thought was really really good. It got kind of middling reviews, but um, it was. It's always been a dream of mine to play through all the Castlevanias, and I digress. I go on really long tangents when I should be sticking on what we have. So, Portrait of Ruin, started playing that, and first and foremost, I haven't played the DS in a very long time, and its screen is just it's itty bitty. And there's two of them, which is nice, but when when you're so used to like the resolution and the quality on a phone, and you go back to the standard definition at best of the DS, it's I'm old. It's tiny. I almost want to get like a magnifying glass, and now that I'm thinking about getting like a 3DS, I'll probably have to get the XL model because it's too little. I can't do it anymore. So the other thing with it is that the Castlevania series, for the most part, much like Amano did for the Final Fantasy series, they've had a primary artist that has been doing the character, the concept art throughout the entire series, and she is just astounding. I have a very hefty file on my computer, or folder on my computer, that's full of nothing but Castlevania art because she is just incredible. And much like when Tetsuya Nomura took over the Final Fantasy series from Amano on like lead character design with 7 moving onwards, uh, I noticed that some of the DS titles on for Castlevania have a different artist that kind of took the head, and Portrait of Ruin is one of those where it's very manga anime heavy instead of classical. And it appears that some of these are one-offs because then we get the, I wish I could remember her name. You get the traditional artist that comes back for like Order of Ecclesia, Lament of Innocence on PS2, and then I don't know. I want to say she did Lords of Shadow as well on the 360 and PS3. And while the game graphics themselves, for the most part, stay the same, and that's I guess kind of the cheap thing about Castlevania, especially in this era where you had the side scroller ones, they reused, I want to say it was all built on the same engine, if not an identical set of engines, where they're reusing sprites and character models from a previous game, reintroducing them, which is nice because you're familiar with that enemy type, how it moves, what's best to use against it. What really changes is the player character themselves and what their abilities are. But this anime manga style carries over into the game as well, where the sprites are a little more colorful and their mannerisms are a little more exaggerated. Like there's 2 characters in this one that you play as, and you can switch between the 2. You can have them run side by side and attack with one another, that's the unique twist to this one, and I dig it. But they follow the tropes of angry young male with female partner who is young and naive, but also gets equally flustered. It's very trope-ish, and I don't know if it's just that I'm getting old that shit's like starting to grate on me. And it's a thing then of well, can I get past the behavior and enjoy the game? And so this one's focusing on Castlevania's comeback because there's a great evil in the land. It's focused in World War II, and apparently Dracula's not. He don't have his shit on lockdown anymore. He don't. He's not running it. His castle's back, but he's nowhere to be found. I just ran into Death. Death's like, yo, where's my boy D? Nowhere to be found. We got this new Count Orlok looking motherfucker and his 2 daughters that are trying to run the shit. Run the show. Keep the ship afloat. But he's doing it through paintings. Because there's power in art. I don't know if they're trying to say something more profound or more deep. Could be that I'm overthinking it because I'm hungry and really want a taco. Um, so the entire premise of the game is one, finding out if, well, that's the thing. So this Count Orlok guy says he doesn't want to resurrect Dracula, but he wants his power. Makes sense. Whatever. Why bow down to the supreme vampire overlord, heavyweight champion of the world, PhD, when you can just take his goods and then run that shit on your own? Um, so he is building power up in the castle through these paintings. Characters have to, or the player has to, find these paintings, go into them, which is its an entire own gigantic section. Beat the boss in the painting, that destroys the painting. You come out, and then you keep going through the castle. And I dig it. I dig it. The last Castlevania I played before was Order of Ecclesia on the DS, and similar concept where it's you're not a Belmont, you're not a primary, you're not like a leading role in the overall Castlevania story. You're more of a side character, and I loved that one to pieces. It really got me back into Castlevania. Beat it a couple times over, loved it. And before that, you had Lords of Shadow, which took an interesting twist. That was it Gabriel Belmont was a member of a holy order, and long story short, is hunting down Satan. But in order to beat Satan, which is the final boss, who was the final boss, he takes on dark powers and becomes Dracula himself. So they had a second one, which it didn't get good reviews. I've yet to play it. I should play it, but it's good to come back to old classics, which is what I have been doing with the Zero Lives stream, in the sense that we're going to play, I stopped playing multiplayer games to focus on story-driven ones. And with Fable, I'm enjoying playing an older title. And I see other streams, like when I fired up Twitch this morning, it was a couple assholes sitting on a couch playing this old Nintendo game. And I don't know that I want to go that far with it, but if we can find good single-player story-driven games that don't look like absolute garbage, because I'm very vain, I like to play pretty things because I'm a pretty person, then I think it could work, and Castlevania is gonna pan out well for that. So I don't know where I was going in the long run with that. I enjoy Castlevania, I guess. I like it a lot. I dig what it's doing, and yeah, you should play it too. If you have a DS, like every fucking GameStop in the country still has old DS cartridges that you can go. I used to do this a lot when I was into Pokemon. I would go and pick up old Pokemon games at GameStops for like $5 a piece, and then steal all the Pokemon on them, because more often than not, nobody had deleted the save files on there. And so I imagine there's like some 10-year-old who just put a shitload of time into this game, and I was just farming his hard work. I'd go in, I'd buy like Fire Red or Ruby, and like, all right, what you got on here? And then throw them into the safari park, and like, all right, we're going to harvest all these Pokemons and build up my own number count without doing any of the work. So if you're trying to get into the old Pokemon games, that's a very sound strategy. I recommend it and endorse it. So the same thing plays out with the Castlevania games, where they have a ton of these old DS cartridges or Game Boy Advance, and they're dirt cheap. They're severely underpriced for what they are. So it's easy enough to go out and grab them, and then you got a solid adventure keeping you busy for 5 to 6 hours while you wait for a job to get pulled forward. But yeah, take a sip. Creaky chair. Maybe that's something I should invest in, is getting a better chair. So yeah, and maybe that's why I have such a love for Bloodborne. Is that it is probably the best 3D Castlevania we'll ever get, especially if you go with the threaded cane. You get that little whip action, and it's great. So that's about going to wrap it up here. We're going to go ahead and try to not screw up the sounds. We're going to lower it down a little bit. Lower it. And that's going to do it. So, again, Unwashed Asses every Thursday morning at 9 a.m., barring cat puke that has to be cleaned up. It's Central Time, the only time zone that matters. I don't give a shit what Scott Johnson says. Central Time Zone's the only time zone that matters. So, I don't know if Woody's going to do another show tonight, but stay tuned to the HFC Gaming channel on Twitch. There might be something that pops up there. And then, of course, Friday nights, we have Friday Night Smite at 9 p.m. That runs till midnight. Lots of good things happening here. A lot of different changes, but I think it's all for the best. But if you want to write the show, head on over to theunwashedasses@gmail.com. If you disagree with my strong love for all things horror and Castlevania, Lovecraft, Bloodborne, etc., or you think I'm just a handsome devil and you want to send me a little fan mail, or of course you can head on over to the Twitter at unwashed_asses and shoot me a tweet. We'll read them if you want to talk about your genitals looking like the Fortress of Solitude because of a terrible life choice you made. More power to you. We'll be glad to discuss that. Till then, we'll see ya.